I'm Harry, this is Drum Electric, and this is the SPD-SX Pro, which you can use as a big fat MIDI controller, which is what we're going to get into. So if you'd like my opinion on the SPD-SX Pro, and you want to know if I think you should buy it, then feel free to head to the link in the description down below and you can watch that very video. The first thing that we need to talk about is how do you actually output the MIDI? There's two ways of doing this. The first is just through a USB cable, which is the USB-B cable, like a printer cable. And the second way is just a 5-pin MIDI cable. Now the great thing is all of the settings that we set up on the USB version, if you just plug in a MIDI cable, then all those settings will be exactly the same. You don't have to change anything. I'd highly recommend using the MIDI cable if you're on a gig because they're a lot more secure. It's a lot less likely for them to fall out and that sort of stuff. But if you're like me and you're just in a little drum space, studio space, then USB is absolutely fine. Right, so let's do this. So the first thing you need to do is actually download the drivers. They're free and they just sit in the background, and it basically enables you to use all of the features through USB on the Pro. So to find them, just literally Google Roland SPD-SX Pro drivers. It's the first link that comes up, the Roland support page. When that loads, there's not that many, but you just want to go down to the list to the first thing that suits your needs. So for me, I'm running Mac, so I'm going to use driver version 1.0 for Mac Big Sur and all those. Give that a minute, you might need to reset your computer, but once you've done that, then we just grab a USB-B cable, turn on the SPD-SX Pro, and we plug in. So what we want to do before we dive into our MIDI controller, our settings and all that sort of stuff, just check the drivers on the actual Pro itself. There's two different drivers and they're both great. So what you want to do is just go to Menu, over to System, down to USB Audio, and then at the top right there, you can see three options. The bottom one, driver mode, you have two. You have generic, and then you have vendor. Now vendor basically just means that you can output MIDI and audio, so you can use all outputs on the audio on the back, which is pretty incredible. But what we want is generic, because that just sends out MIDI through the USB, then we can just hit kit, and let's plug in. So once you're plugged in, I'm just going to check on Ableton because that's my software of choice, but you don't have to use that. You can use whichever software you like, whichever software you're wanting to get MIDI from, just use that. It's pretty much the same. You might just have to adapt some settings to whatever you're using. So I'm going to go into preferences and just check under MIDI that the SPD-SX Pro in and out is showing up, which in this case it is. And the great thing about Ableton is it's automatically ticked track. So every time I plug it in, I'm good to go straight away. If you want to send MIDI from Ableton to the Pro, then you want to tick track on the out SPD-SX Pro option. In my case, I'm not going to do that right now. I'm just going to take input into Ableton. So I'm going to keep the SPD-SX Pro track in ticked. It's quite a mouthful after a while. So with that, all I'm going to do is pick up a stick and hit the SPD-SX Pro and check that I'm getting MIDI. As you look at my screen, what you want to look out for is the top right. There's a little orange square that'll flash if we're getting an input. Stunning. So at this point, the MIDI channels are accepting MIDI from all inputs and all channels. I'm just going to make it specific to the SPD-SX Pro because that means that if I'm running multiple things that have MIDI, they won't clash and I won't trigger other things. So to do that in Ableton, I'm just going to select the SPD-SX Pro as the input, and then channels. Drum pads tend to send out from channel 10, so you can either select that or you can have it on all channels. For the sake of this, I'm just going to go channel 10. Because that's what it's sending from. So now I'm just going to drag a drum rack onto the MIDI channel so I can see which notes it's sending. In this case, it's a bunch of them, which is really cool. On the SPD-SX Pro, we can change that. So for this, all we're going to do is go onto Menu, we're going to go onto Kit Edit 2, then we're just going to go down to Kit MIDI. And this basically means we can change the MIDI channels on each individual patch rather than all of the settings over the SPD-SX Pro, which is really, really useful. So now we get this screen, which is all of the MIDI notes that each thing is sending. So that's all 9 pads, all 8 triggers, 2 foot switches, and the hi-hat control. So that's a lot of things we can send out, which is one of the reasons why this is great. So as you can see, the top pad, pad number 1 at the top left, is sending the note 60, or in this case, C4, which is really useful that it actually shows which note it is. So we can just scroll across and change that to whichever note. In my case, just for this demo, I'm going to keep that the same because I don't need to change it. But as you can see, as you change it, a little asterisk comes up next to it if you've got the same note as another pad. So if I change it to 61, as you can see, pad 1 and 2 are the same. So pad 2's got a little asterisk just to let you know that, hey, you're sending the same MIDI note from these two pads. So you might want to check that. Handy dandy little feature. Roland, I appreciate you. I appreciate you. You can also change lots of very specifics within this. So that's gate time, which is basically how long that note is being sent for. In this case, it's pretty much the shortest at 0.1. But if you wanted a longer note, if you're doing something more melodic, then you can change that. The channel, and this is really useful, everything is being sent to global, but If you wanted each pad to be sent out on a different channel, but the same MIDI note for whatever reason, then you can do that on each pad, on each kit, and that's how you do it in there. And then finally, Ext control, they're all off, but you've got two options there. You can either have the on or on alt, which basically means you hit it once, it's on, you hit it again, turns off, rather than you just hit it once and it's on, you know what I mean? And that's it. That's the basics of sending out MIDI from the SPD-SX Pro. What I'd highly recommend looking at is things like Ableton Drummer, where Toby has actually built patches so you can actually change the patch on these and do a lot more cool things that are slightly more hidden and a little bit more difficult for us to control. But AbletonDrummer.com, highly recommend what he's done because it is incredible and is very useful. So adapt this for your needs, have fun with it, because this suddenly opens up the entire world of MIDI. And like I said, if you change all these settings through USB MIDI, but you then want to transfer to a MIDI cable, literally all you have to do is plug into the MIDI cable and you're done. It's great. But for now, if you have any questions, please lob them in the comment section down below, and I hope you have a great day.